is Donald Trump is a great campaigner within the American right. And he will absolutely be the nominee. There is no one who can challenge him because there are so many people who are staunch supporters who will vote for him in the primaries no matter who else is in and no matter what Donald Trump does. So he's a lock to be the candidate. So is Biden. Biden is an incumbent president. They're not going to let Bernie Sanders run as a Democrat again, and the Democratic Party has already closed ranks to prevent a primary fight from even happening. Oh, wow, he's a complete fuckwit. No, he's not a serious candidate. And although, honestly, it is refreshing to see somebody who basically is from the American far right running as if he was from the American far left. But, we're talking political horseshoes now. Okay, so it's going to be these two guys. What we saw in the midterm elections last November was that independents showed up in numbers, which is something they don't normally do. Normally, independents only show up for the big elections, not the off years, but they showed up in numbers. And in exit polling, they indicated by very strong margins that they strongly disapproved of the economic management of the Biden administration. They thought it was hurting them personally. And yet they voted for Democrats by huge margins. If you're an independent in the United States, the only way that you can influence the political process is to show up for the general election. Donald Trump is trying to make the general election not matter. So independents have already decided that even if it's not in their own economic interests, it is in their political survival interests that they have to vote against Donald Trump and anyone that he supports. You do that on a national scale in a general election, you're looking at a massive defeat for the Republicans. Well, we're going through a political transition, and it takes a decade, and we're just not through it yet. We'll get through it. The factions are moving around. We will have a different Democratic and Republican parties a few years from now that will be a little bit more sane. But we're in the churn right now, and that's always ugly. No, the deals that are beyond the dollar are extraordinarily limited. So let's see, what's the best way to attack this? If you're going to be a global currency, like a real global currency, you need to have a massive volume that circulates because you have to be able to lubricate global trade without your currency value changing a lot. So you both need a lot of the currency, you need to be a large economy, and you can't be a major economic player in trading. Because if you were, you would care what the value of the currency is, and you would change it day to day to serve your own interests. Right now, that's only the United States. The Europeans kind of removed themselves from the equation with the bailout packages back in the first decade of this century when they started confiscating insured bank deposits to pay for the bailouts. That was a bad call if you wanted to be a global currency. Understand politically why it was done, but it had an economic cost. The Japanese aren't interested at all. They tried back in the 80s and it hurt them badly. They will never do it again. The Brits, until they figure out what Brexit means, they're completely out of the equation. And that's everyone. Yes, the Chinese have a lot of currency, but it's all locked up within their own system because their first and foremost concern when it comes to finance is control of the domestic market. And every time they crack open their financial world a little bit, like €1 trillion equivalent floods out in just a few months. So we're actually nowhere near the high level in Chinese history for the percentage of their goods that are resolved in non-dollar terms. So there's a lot of talk. Action has been less. And if you look at some of the specifics that have been announced, you've got the Argentines saying that they're all in. Never look to Argentina for financial trends unless it's about truancy. We've got Bangladesh saying that they will pay for a nuclear reactor in rubles. The Bangladeshis can't pay for it because they don't have the money. This is the most corrupt country in Asia. They were never going to get the reactors in the first place. So saying that it's going to be paid for in rubles, whatever. The Russians and the Indians had a near public argument about how their respective currencies were worthless, and neither of them wanted the other ones. So now all you've got left is Brazil saying, yeah, we'd love to have a multinational currency to support international trade, but this is a country that exports goods that are almost 95% purely dollar denominated, so they're just kind of raging against the reality. They have no ability to move it beyond. And then finally, if we did get another currency, who manages it? The Russians would like it to be the ruble so that they can manage it. Same with Argentina. But that wouldn't work for anybody except for Russia and Argentina. But the problem with a neutral reserve currency that's not national is who manages it. Gold, there is not enough volume of gold to support international trade unless we were to find about 100 times more than we currently have on a global basis. And Bitcoin has all the same problems as gold with none of the benefits, because at least gold at the end of the day does have an industrial use. Bitcoin does not. So I disagree in that on the very base level. There are some places that look really good. One of the things to remember about globalization is it created this artificial security environment that encouraged a lot of countries that had not been able to be significant industrial powers before to suddenly join the game. Germany and Korea are probably the poster children for the success of globalization. But if we go back to something a little bit more basic, where trade is more localized, where you have to have a decent security system that you can maintain yourself, or you have a neighbor that does it for you, break the world up. And if you look at a map of like 1910, you probably are going to get a pretty good idea of who the countries are that can actually do reasonably well. So I think Southeast Asia is probably the region overall that's primed to grow the most, because here you have an area that does not have a history of going to war with itself, not like Northeast Asia or Europe. Most of the resources that they need, they produce themselves, or those resources come from Australia. Most of these, or this region as a unit, can produce most of the food that it needs, and what it can't can come from Australia and New Zealand. And most of these countries have a reasonably positive relationship with the United States, both strategically and economically. So while I don't think the United States is going to be facing a war with the Chinese, I don't think they're that dumb, I can see some sort of mini globalized system that takes place in Southeast Asia, with the Americans being at least an adjunct part. Taiwan, assuming that, again, that there's no war, is probably kind of join the system with Singapore as kind of the high-tech anchors for that sort of system. That's something that could work really well. I also think Mexico is in a pretty good spot. Now, the cartels are a problem. The drugs are a problem. That is not going away anytime soon. That is going to define the successes and the failures of the Mexican state and Mexican culture for decades to come. And that's an ugly story. But Mexico has done something that most countries can only dream of. They've cut an economic long-term partnership with Donald Trump. And if you have that already done, then it's just an issue of building out the infrastructure and the industrial plant. And Mexico knows how to do that. So the NAFTA 2 Accords, because they were done by the anti-trade hard right in the United States, are really secure no matter what happens with the American political model moving forward. And then kind of the final, we mentioned France earlier. I think France is going to be okay. And then the final country that I normally would have not considered that I need to add in now is Japan. Because Japan, like Mexico, got a deal with Donald Trump and has since gotten a deal with Joe Biden, making Japan the only country that has cut a long-term economic and security partnership with both sides of the American political aisle. They found a way to buy themselves into America's inner circle. It is old and it is aging quickly. Three things they have going for them. Number one, even though they have no resources, they now, courtesy of the U.S., have access to the entire Eastern Hemisphere. That makes a big difference. Number two, as their population has aged into obsolescence, they have moved more and more of their industrial plant abroad, most notably to the United States and Mexico. So they no longer have as much of a labor crunch as a place like Germany does. They don't have to make the transition nearly as hard. And then third, and what people miss, is that Japan has been very successful at figuring out how to get by with fewer people while also boosting their birth rate. Japan today has a higher birth rate than Italy, Germany, China, South Korea, or Taiwan. So they're still old. They're still aging. But the process has slowed down a lot in the last 25 years. So every concern you have is legitimate and is for the long haul, but they've found a way to buy themselves some more time. Well, considering the nature of their financial sector, I'm not sure it ever was. I mean, and that's the part of the problem for my work is like I can tell you if a country is going to experience national success, but that does not mean that they're a good investment destination. Their population has actually probably been bigger than China for 7 or 8 years.
Planned economy, yes.
Exactly. Okay, so I think India's future is pretty bright. They're the first stop out of the Persian Gulf, so they won't have a meaningful energy crisis. They're one of the few countries that could actually intervene in the Persian Gulf if they wanted to. I'm not saying that they're itching to, but it's an option, which in the world we're going to is good to have options. Their tech sector is small for the size of their economy, but growing and pretty robust and pretty inexpensive. And they have more than enough energy processing to make sure that they're not going to face the sort of shocks in terms of supply for either manufacturing or agriculture that a lot of the rest of the world will.